Welcome to Code Sandwich Hour, a certified fresh event where we talk code and sandwiches, and it takes about an hour. This week's special guest is Eduardo Bouças, a senior staff engineer over at Netlify. Thanks for joining us, Eduardo.
Great to be here.
All right, so before we really get into the main part of this show, we have to start with the most important question, obviously. And based on the GIF you sent me yesterday on Twitter, I'm on the edge of my seat for what is the best sandwich?
Right, so I knew you were going to ask me this, and so I thought a bit, well, maybe I should have like a controversial answer, and maybe I'm going to go
Great.
with something like, oh, my favorite sandwich is a hot dog, and then we go into this whole conversation about whether it classifies as a sandwich, and kind of will open this Pandora box. But no, I'm not gonna go there. I will have to say a burger. I love a good burger, and so that will have to be my choice. It was difficult because there's a lot of great sandwiches, but it has to be a burger. Um, yeah.
Okay. So there are lots of detail we can go into here. First, I love the hot dog thing because maybe we got into it in a previous show, and I think that's part of the reason why I love this subject is because the people feel very passionate about where the line is. But well, let's just start here. So what are the toppings? Your like go-to set of toppings, or do you like to switch it up?
I actually like it simple. Like I don't usually go overboard, although there's a place nearby that does a great burger, but it's like huge. And so I don't have it often because I need to prepare mentally and physically to eat that burger, and I can only do it so many times. And it has like everything that you could possibly imagine, like uh, obviously cheese and bacon and an egg, and it like so many things. And but I also like a simpler version where it's just really good meat. A vegetarian version is also good. I've had like really good veggie burgers. um but usually, yeah, a really good bun, and very simple ingredients will usually do it for me.
Okay, so you're relying on the core ingredients being
Exactly.
really solid.
Exactly, yeah.
So do you have like a what is it that the fat percentage in the meat that is optimal? Because I know it can range from like here's this super lean patty to some restaurants will do like 50-50 almost, I think.
Mhm. Well, here's the thing. So I chose a burger, but I'm not exactly a burger connoisseur. Like I won't,
Okay.
I'm just really good at eating them. I'm not so good as like knowing how to, categorize them or kind
Fair.
of,
Yes.
I'm just really good at, I land at a place, I'll order the burger, and I'm good at like judging it and kind of eating it essentially, but I won't know the details of like fat percentage and things like that. Yeah,
Okay. Well, that's, I mean, the most important part, or like the
yeah,
best part. The best part is the
yeah,
eating it part. So yeah,
yeah,
that's
exactly.
fair. So now, in you talked about a place you like to go locally. Is that, do you feel like that is the best burger, or have you traveled and had something better in a different place?
I've had a few. When I was so I lived in London for a while, and I my absolute favorite burger there was in a place called Honest Burger, and it was really really good. Since I've moved back to Portugal, there are a few places that I like. This one place that I mentioned locally is that kind of holy grail, pulling all the stops, big burger. But I like to try. It's because it's such like a universal language. Like everyone knows it's a burger, so I like to try it everywhere I go and kind of collect my travel log of good burgers. So yeah, I
I
like to
love that.
try whenever I go, wherever I go. I like to try a burger. Yeah.
Yeah, because you can find them a lot of places. Like, where's the farthest away from Portugal that you've found a burger?
Uh, that's a good question. Maybe somewhere in the US, although I'm not really sure. Like I can't pinpoint like a specific place that I had it, but probably the furthest from home was probably somewhere in the US. I'm
Okay.
sure I had plenty of burgers when I was in the US. So yeah,
I
I
know
think
they
that
are
those.
all over. They're all over the
Yeah,
place there. Yeah.
yeah.
There's like you can have a restaurant that has I don't know, like some different type of food where you wouldn't associate them or expect them to have a burger, and they still
Mm,
have a burger.
yeah, yeah. I feel like building like a world map of burgers. Like this, I had a great burger here. Like pin it on a map.
Oh yes.
That would be a cool project.
I saw a project that was more about I I might be confusing projects. I wanted to say sandwiches, but it might just be food. But it was
Mm,
like this interactive map. It was really really cool. But yeah, like instead I'm gonna put the pins not in where I've traveled, but in where I've actually eaten a burger. I
yeah,
love that idea.
yeah, nice.
All right. Well, with that, once again, I make myself hungry, and for me, it's right after lunch. I'm like, yeah, maybe I don't, I shouldn't. Well, I just won't fixate on it. It'll be fine. It'll be fine.
Yeah,
Okay, so with that, I will step back and kind of give an outline of the show for those of you who are new. For those of you who have been around, it's probably starting to feel a little familiar. But the way this works is that we'll fit the rest of the show into three segments that were typically a really bad punny name associated with them. I'll still try to do that today, but going to take it in a slightly different direction. And what we'll do is today we're just going to call the theme. I suppose we'll just call the theme Jamstack. I feel like that'll tie our segments together. And for those of you viewing live, if you have any questions for Eduardo along the way, you can drop them into the chat, and I'll get to what I can and try to sprinkle them in throughout the conversation. And just a reminder that these shows are syndicated on CFE.dev and YouTube in a video format. And you can also get them in just audio format wherever you choose to get your podcasts. And last, for those of you who are listening to a recording, you can please feel free to join us for future events so you can sneak those questions into the show. We record on the first and third Thursdays of every month at 1 p.m. Eastern US time, which is 5 p.m. GMT time. And what time do we say it is for you right now, Eduardo?
it's just over 6 p.m. for
6.
me.
Okay, amazing, fantastic. And with that, let's jump into the first segment. Today, I'm going to call the first segment "Static." Don't really have a great pun. Well, I think I'm going to save my pun for the last one. But in the first few shows, I spent a lot of time in the early days of our guest careers. But Eduardo, I feel like you and I have a lot of parallel paths over the last maybe 5 or 6 years. So I'm going to spend the majority of the time there. But I still feel like we owe some respect, or that we can also get some foundation from learning a little bit about where you came and where you spent your first few years in your career. So yeah, I guess with that, maybe just give us a little bit of an outline. What were the first few jobs you had in tech? How did you get started? What languages were you working in, et cetera?
Sure. Yeah. So when I got into tech, I quickly realized that the web was kind of the thing that really interested me. I wanted to build for the web. And so the first jobs that I had were, I suppose you'd call full stack development. I was doing a bit of everything. I was working on like a PHP site and working on the back end, but also kind of doing a little bit on the front end. And I guess I was like exploring the parts of the stack that were more interesting to me. And at some point in my career, I had a job that was like less about building solutions for end customers and more about enabling my team to build those solutions and like creating tools that allow them to ship better and to ship faster and more reliably. And I think that was another kind of pivoting point for me, because I learned that I was really passionate about building for developers and building, helping developers build. Um, and so that's where I, decided that I wanted to focus on developer tooling. And I started exploring some projects in that space. I created a few open source projects, and not long after that, I kind of came across the Jamstack movement, which didn't have a name at the time. It was this idea of kind of building things with a slightly different paradigm, where you would, rather than rendering everything at request time, you would kind of pre-build some things, and it kind of got introduced into static site generators and things like that. And I became really interested in that philosophy. And I think that point, like from that point on, it kind of informed all the steps that I took in my career, and kind of how I ended up where I am today. So that's like, yeah, that's an overview of like where I started and how I ended up where I am.
That's a great. It's I find it so interesting because there's so many parallels I pull to that. I feel like I followed a similar path as you, but always like a couple years um, behind. In fact, what you had mentioned on in terms of uh, recognizing that you really liked building things for developers, I did the same thing. I spent almost 9 years, I think, in the agency and freelance world, and it was my last job in agency where I was managing a team, and I discovered that I was, there was a lot that was kind of the HR side of management and all of that, but the other piece, more than usually what I tried to do was more than building websites for clients. I was trying to build tooling so that my engineers could build websites quicker and
Yeah.
more pleasantly. And I love that, but it was the agency world, so I like kept getting beat down in like, nope, we got to ship this to the client. We can't step back and focus on the system. And I get it, it makes sense, but that's definitely what kind of nudged me in the, I want to go to products, and I'm specifically products that
Yeah.
are building things for developers. And so on that note, I want to talk a little bit about a couple. You mentioned a couple of the the open source tools that you have built for developers, and I have a story usually, or I have a story I think that parallels to each one of them, and but I'll save my stories till after I let you talk a little bit about them. But I wanted to start with the project that's called Static API Generator, and so could you tell us just yeah, a little bit about what it is? Like what point in your career were you making this? What problem was it solving for you and for the community at that
Yeah.
time?
Sure. I should start by saying that I'm really bad at um, ensuring that those projects that I've created were kind of sustainable in the long term. So at the
Mhm.
moment, I have a bit of a graveyard of projects that I started because I wanted to
Sure.
explore new
Yeah.
things, and to
Yeah.
get into new technologies. And whenever I did that, I wanted to. There was a part that was kind of for myself because I wanted to learn these things, but there was also a part of like sharing it with others. So every single project that I've worked on, I made sure to make it public and to write about it whenever I could, so that others could benefit from that. And so, yeah, I had a few like those. The one that you're talking about, the idea was um, taking a static site generator and applying that same principle to an API. So in the same way that um, that you push a markdown file to your GitHub repo, and magically there's a static site generator that will pick it up, it'll build a new version of your site, and it will deliver that content in HTML to your visitors, I was kind of toying with the same idea, but for delivering like a JSON API. So let's say that you want to build an API for listing, I don't know, movies, and you'd be able to add a markdown file to your repo that kind of captures some information about a movie, and then that would automatically be translated into a REST API, a limited REST API, because it's inherently static. But for kind of consuming the content, you would kind of expose the same interface that you would get from a typical API. And to be honest with you, I've never used that on a real project. That was purely out of curiosity of like, what if I do this? Would this be useful for anyone? And so I just had a lot of fun in like exploring that idea and building it out and then writing about it. Yeah, and every once in a while I get like an issue or like a feature request on that project and in other projects, and then I feel super guilty because I don't have the bandwidth to to work on those projects. But yeah, I guess that's that's the beauty of open source. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. So, is this trying to get the context here? Is this in is Netlify already a tool by the time that you started this project?
So I'm not sure exactly. I'm trying to remember when exactly this specific project happened, but I know that when I was first exposed to what is now the Jamstack, or to the idea of kind of building static sites in a modern way, the first tools that I've used were Jekyll and GitHub Pages. Those were the things that I was kind of working with. Not long after that, I started using Netlify, and it kind of opened up a whole universe of things, because I was not constrained by this one specific tool, and I could explore different static site generators, which was great. And so now that I say this, the static API thing was very likely after I've discovered Netlify, because I don't think I've used like Jekyll to build this. So yeah, but that was kind of my initial tool set. And in fact, some of the other projects that I built that were kind of prior to this one, I created a project called Static Man, and at that time, that project was kind of built specifically for that stack. You were kind of using Jekyll and you were using GitHub Pages, and this project was kind of targeting that combination of tools specifically, not because purely because that was kind of my knowledge at the time, what were the tools that I was kind of exposed to. And then obviously the ecosystem evolved a lot, and then I explored other things, but kind of that was the tool set that I started with.
But at that time, I mean, you couldn't even, I mean, even in the early days of Netlify, I feel like they had more capabilities than, I mean, because the origination of, maybe I should say the static site generators, as I know them, really began like in 2008 with that Jekyll and GitHub Pages, and so that had been around for many years, but that service is super limited. So that is it, because that's Static Man, right? Didn't that bring some? Is it like dynamic capabilities to static sites?
Yeah, so that's the story of that project is kind of interesting, and I think it had a big role in kind of how I ended up investing personally in this space, because right about the time where I would have discovered this new paradigm and this new tool set, I remember watching an online conference called JekyllConf, and there was a talk by Tom Presser-Werner, and he was like giving this talk about his predictions for where the space might evolve in the near future. And he was talking about this idea of having, of having a service, some kind of a service that would receive dynamic data. It would then push it to your version controlled repository, and that would trigger a new version of your site. And that really resonated with me. And from that moment, I was like, I'm gonna build this. I want to explore this. And that's really what Static Man is. It's an API that can receive your dynamic content, whether it's like processing a form or sending like an AJAX call or an API call that you make from anywhere really, and you tell Static Man how you want that data to be translated into static files. So you can say, I want this to be like a JSON file or a markdown file with some front matter, and I want these properties. And so Static Man will take that, it'll write a file to your repository. It can like create a pull request, so you decide whether to approve it or not. And then that's it. And then you merge it, and it will trigger, the CI process that will rebuild your site. And then you suddenly have that dynamic content being part of your static site. And the original use case was really about kind of comments on a blog, because I had just rebuilt my blog using Jekyll at the time. And I was really kind of enjoying the experience of kind of building my site using this new paradigm. But I didn't really know what to do with the comments. Like, how do you, I wanted to have people adding comments to my posts, but how does that work if everything is just a static page? And there were like solutions that you could use, like pulling a third-party library that you would kind of include with JavaScript, but I
it just never feels quite right. Then you got to do all this work on the client. Yeah.
Exactly. And so that's why I kind of decided to explore that idea, and it was great because it ended up exposing me to a lot of people in the space and a lot of projects. I remember talking with Matthias from Netlify very early on when I started the project, and I became like much more invested in this space. And so I like to, I like to think back as kind of really the beginning of my journey into the Jamstack was kind of creating that project and trying to solve that particular problem in the ecosystem.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you had kind of like the first pieces of Netlify, like you focused on the hook and triggering the build and all of that, and then Netlify comes along and they unlock. It's like that last, maybe not the last missing piece, but a big piece of the puzzle was the whole. How do we? I really think it's almost the core of it is cache invalidation at the CDN level, because that was such a complicated thing to solve if you were going to deploy so iteratively like that.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, okay, so this is probably a good time to transition. I feel like you're talking about like, you're getting into the kind of the shape of what Jamstack eventually became. And so, let's kick off segment number 2. And segment number 2, again, without a pun today, I'll just call it dynamic. And I'm like, well, maybe dynamic isn't the right term, but there's so many terms for everything you can do with the Jamstack today, like ISR, DPR, SSR, DSG, all these things, all these wild patterns. But I think before we get too far, wanted to talk to you about the project that you did while working or built while working at StackBit called SourceBit, and I have a parallel story here. Oh, in fact, I'll go back in a few minutes and tell you my static the static API story. But yeah, let's jump into SourceBit. So can you tell us a little bit about your move to StackBit and the work that you did on the SourceBit project?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I think one of the challenges that that I felt when I was exploring the space was that there are a lot of different ways of doing similar things. Luckily you have a lot of choice for tooling these days. You have a lot of, static site generators and frameworks and headless CMSs and deployment platforms. And it can sometimes feel a little bit intimidating if you're new and you just want to build something. It may be a little intimidating to figure out how do you connect all these pieces. And I think StackBit took a really important step in that space because it allowed you to select, like, I want to use this static site generator, I want to pick this theme, I want to use this CMS, do it for me. And that I found really exciting, and I was excited to be involved with that project. And SourceBit was, I think, another step in that direction, because the idea behind SourceBit was to create a pipeline of content, if you will. So the idea of, you want to retrieve content from somewhere, likely a headless CMS, and you want it to you probably want to manipulate it or transform it somehow, and then you want it to end as part of your static site generator or framework that you're using. And again, connecting those dots is not always easy. You need to figure out how to talk to this RESTful API that your headless CMS exposes, and what is the format that you get that data. Do I get like an object? Do I get like an array of objects? Like, what are the properties? And what happens if you decide to migrate to a new CMS because maybe this one doesn't work for you anymore, you want to move? Does that mean that I will have to change all of my templates because now the data is different? Or similarly, if I want to use I don't know, Next.js instead of Gatsby, what do I do with my data? Do I still get the data in the right format? And so the idea behind SourceBit was to create like a unified format where that data would use, and you would just choose your adapters, like in a plugin ecosystem. So if I want to use, let's say, Hugo as my static site generator, and I want to pull data from Contentful, then I will go to this library of plugins. I'm going to pick a Contentful plugin, and I'm going to pick a Hugo content, and all of those dots are connected for me. And if I want to then move to a different headless CMS, I can just swap the CMS plugin, and the data will come in the exact same format because it's like this unified data format. And then there were kind of other tooling around it that allowed you to have like a CLI that you can just type a command, and it kind of guides you into configuring all of that process. So you don't have to learn this really complicated syntax. You can just, we can ask you questions. What is your data coming from? What is this model for? And you kind of do some magic, and we create all the configuration for you. So I think I see it as another kind of step in that path that StackBit took, of like connecting all of these dots. And I think that was, I was super excited to kind of collaborate on that.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's a super interesting project, and I brought it up for two reasons. One, I work at StackBit today, and we didn't overlap at all. And StackBit looks very different today than StackBit did the StackBit that you're describing did. But still, even today, as different as StackBit is, I'm working with this tool almost daily, and we're thinking about what's the future, what's the next iteration on that. But it's just like it's such a powerful concept that it has stuck around. And secondly, a related story, and similar to my static API story, for me, I think it was the early days of the pandemic. Was on. Yeah, I remember just being on a call with CTO of the agency I was working on at the time, and another engineer. And what we had done is we had been in the Jamstack space for, I think, probably about 2 years at that point. It was like 2017, 2018. We dove all in, and so we had felt out and tested a lot of these tools. And at this time, it's like you're seeing a new headless CMS every week. You're seeing a new front end framework every month or so. And so we settled in on Gatsby, and then we picked a couple different CMSs that would they catered to our typical clients. So if a client came in, depending on their budget or the size of their site, we'd pick a different CMS. And so, like you mentioned, you said, well, what if you want to move CMSs? Well, in our case, we had settled on Gatsby, so we were confident in the front end code, but we said, well, but our back end might be one of these different sources. There's got to be, like, we need to build this thing that can pull from all these different places, but the front end code never has to change. And the very next day, I'm not kidding you, like the very next day, I was looking around for something, and I found SourceBit, and I was like, somebody has done it. So it was, it was kind of amazing. And that's the parallel to the static API story, was that a similar sort of thing. I was playing around in the space, and I didn't have like a real need to build a static API, but I was like, this concept of static API, all these things that we can do now that we have Netlify it's amazing. They have unlocked this world of possibilities. And so I was like, I'm gonna invent a term called static API, and I'm gonna write about it. And then I think that an article even got picked up by Chris Coyer. He wrote something and commented on it, and I was like, yes, this is amazing. I have found something. And then only a little bit after that did I discover your static API project, which had been around for years. And so, anyways, this is I think that the parallels are super interesting, and love the SourceBit project. So yeah, anyways, enough about me. I should stop talking about me on this interview show. But anyway, so after StackBit, you moved on to Netlify, and early on in your time at Netlify, you wrote a little bit about how there's a lot going behind the scenes, or going on behind the scenes on the team who are working on all these node-based projects, a lot of them being open source and run by a small team. And I'm sure you're a much bigger team now, but curious for you if you can give us kind of like a look behind the curtain in those, I guess in your early Netlify days, and what your team was working on.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, when I joined Netlify, as a continuation of that drive that I talked about earlier, of kind of building tools for developers, and that's exactly what I started working on when I joined the company. I was working mostly around our node services, so like the CLI, which is a very important interface into our product. Our build system itself is an open source node project that everyone can contribute to, and a bunch of other node projects that we use at Netlify. And I think you're referring to an article that I wrote about kind of how we ship those projects. And indeed, it was it was a very small team compared to compared to the scope of those projects and how broad they are in how they kind of interact with our product. And there was I think one of the key things that I tried to kind of portray in that article was that we were only able to do that because we were super well organized in terms of kind of automating as much as possible. We had people on our team who were really good at creating robots for everything that you could possibly imagine. There was a bot that would handle all of that, and
What's an example there of like something that you wouldn't have thought you might use a bot for that your team was?
well, for example, when it comes to and these tools are widely known, and I'm not gonna tell you something that is kind of super innovative, but things like deploy anything that we deploy to npm, that we publish to npm, that is fully automated. We never go in and kind of type npm publish. There's a process that like I can guide you through the process. So when you create a PR, you always use a it's called a conventional commit. I think it's the name of the project. It's like this prefix in the PR title that allows you to say, is this a feature? Is this a patch? And so that prefix would automatically inform the type of semver change that we're about to ship. And then once that PR is reviewed and merged, then there's a tool called release please, and that will automatically create a release PR that says, you've merged these PRs into the main branch. Based on the prefixes that you've used, you're going to release version 1.2.3 of your project. And
Okay.
once you merge that PR, then there's an action that will automatically kind of run all the tests. And then once that's done, it'll do the publishing to npm. And this might seem like like the basic concept, but when you add it up, the amount of time that you save by optimizing all of these things and by not kind of worrying about the grunt work, it does allow you to spend more time kind of doing the things that matter the most. And we do have a bunch of things like that, and that's one of the key things that I think helped us ship so many things with such a small team. Fortunately, we did grow the teams since then, and so we're able to do more things, but we still live by that principle of like trying to streamline our processes as much as possible.
So with so much of that work being open source, I know it can be really uh, well. The tendency is I think for a lot of people or a lot of groups is that the code may be open, but it's still the goal is still self-serving. Obviously, like that's you have to serve your project. Were you getting active involvement from the community? Either was it mostly issues? Were you getting real contributions from community members?
No, we do get um, meaningful and useful and great contributions from the community like all the time.
Oh,
And
great. Okay.
yeah, definitely. So um, I kind of see it as a two-way relationship in that we have I think it's great for the people that use our product that the code bases are open and that we're working in the open, and it's there's a sense of transparency that we like to promote. And what we get back is this involvement from the community, and I think that synergy works really well. And we've had lots of great examples in our CLI. For example, we have entire commands that were contributed by someone in the community.
Well, that's amazing.
That's great. And all across our repos, I do feel really lucky to have constant input from the community, because you certainly have a ton of feedback that will let you make your product better, and that feedback is coming at you. Like, you don't have to find it anywhere, you don't have
Mhm.
to, it's coming at you, and I think that's great. And yeah, that is, and I think that extends beyond the 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 projects that I was telling you about. I think it really is a company philosophy of kind of doing things in the open, and working towards like an open web ecosystem. Um, I think a good example of that is, we recently launched Edge Functions, and everything about that product was built with the open web in mind. Like, everything is open source, everything is built on open standards. So I think this is a pattern that we have at Netlify, and I like to think that it benefits our customers and the community, and it also benefits us massively.
Yeah, can you, I was actually, it's a great segue. I was gonna ask you about edge functions next. So can you, give the folks listening and watching in, just like maybe a quick overview on what exactly are edge functions for Netlify?
Sure. So maybe it's worth uh, going back a little bit and talk about kind of serverless functions for
Sure.
anyone
Mhm.
who might not be familiar with that. And the idea is that, and I'm going to be talking about Netlify functions, but the same principle applies if you're using other providers. And the idea behind a Netlify function is that you can um, write a piece of backend logic, of self-contained backend logic, that you push to our platform, and you don't ever need to go anywhere near like configuring a server, or worrying about kind of scaling up that server, or kind of adding security patches to the server. Like, it's like a managed backend for your code, with the benefit of it being deployed and built and versioned alongside your front-end application. So you don't have to go into this other platform and create a service that somehow connects with your front-end application. They all live under the same roof, and they're all deployed and versioned at the same time. It's just a way for you to write your server code without worrying about a server. So that's kind of the general idea behind a serverless function. And an edge function is sort of a next step, or it's an evolution of that concept, in that you still have the same mental model, but that code that we're talking about is running in multiple locations around the world. It's running closer to your users, and therefore you're able to create like faster experiences with a different level of interactivity, because the code is kind of running where users are. So it's a similar concept, but kind of distributed in more locations around the world, essentially.
So
There
what's
are other, yeah, sorry.
so I was gonna say, like, what's to contextualize it, a common use case where someone might use an edge function on their site?
Mhm. Yeah. Um, so it's worth, I want to do another comparison because I think it's interesting and useful to kind of make that comparison with a typical serverless function. When you write a Netlify function, you are always terminating a request. And what I mean by this is you're going to create a function file. That function will be assigned a URL on your live site. And when someone hits that URL, they will get whatever response you've created in that backend code. And that's the end of the request. And you can typically use that for creating an API or for rendering a page or any dynamic backend code. You can use a serverless function for that. An edge function, you can also do that, but it has a middleware pattern that is also possible. And what I mean by this is you can create an edge function that can intercept a request as it comes in, or intercept a response as it comes back out. And so to answer your question about example use cases, you could do things like, for example, internationalization. You can have an edge function that sits at the very beginning of your request chain. You can configure the paths that function will run on. And that function can look at the geolocation because we inject the information about where the user is accessing the function from. And then based on that, you can write dynamic code that says, if this person is coming from this country, then I want them to be redirected to this route because maybe there's some country specific content that you want to render. And that allows you to do things, at the beginning of the request chain so that you're not reloading a page on the client. You're not going to see a flash of content because you're doing things after the page has started to be rendered. You're doing it at the very beginning of the request chain. So that's an interesting example of things that you could do when you process the request as it comes in. Another interesting example is you can modify the response as it comes back out. So you could have, a page, and you can replace all the instances of a certain word with another word, and kind of do any type of manipulation or change the source of an image, for example, on that page before it's rendered to the client. And so I think having that level of control, having that power of intercepting every single one of your requests and modifying the response gives you a whole universe of use cases that were not possible or were not as easy to do with kind of previous primitives.
That makes sense. And I know we're at the very beginning of this world of dynamic work being done on the edge. With a lot of folks that I have talked to who are familiar with the traditional Jamstack pattern of delivering static content from the edge, and not quite here, I feel like a topic that comes up a lot is, well, if I know internationalization, great. But if I know all of that content ahead of time, shouldn't I just statically generate all of that content? And so where do you find the line between I should use an edge function or I should pre-render all of that content?
Yeah, I think it really depends. When you're building an application, there are a lot of things that will inform that decision, a lot of constraints. And I don't think that edge functions will be, a magical solution that should be used for everything. I like to see serverless functions and now edge functions as kind of different items that you have in your toolbox as a developer. And rather than these solutions like prescribing a certain way of doing things, they will remove any constraints, and they will kind of allow you to decide on a case by case what is the thing that makes the most sense for this particular project with these constraints that I have, and based on the things that are optimizing for. Because I do see this as kind of giving developers more control, and a rather advanced control over the platform that they're deploying their sites to, because you can do pretty powerful things with an edge function, things that, you know, you can start manipulating your cache headers, you can start kind of completely changing how the browser interacts with your content. And, you know, I don't think everyone will want to use these patterns for everything, but I do like the idea of giving people that control, and kind of opening up those possibilities. That's what I'm super excited about with edge functions in particular.
I love that. And I really like the way that you phrase that this is not a prescription. It's another tool in your
Yeah,
toolbox, and you have to yeah, you have to approach every scenario and every challenge uniquely and solve it with the tools you have. Yeah,
yeah,
that's great.
yeah.
Well, on that note, let's segue into our third and final segment for this show. And for this segment, I'm going to call it On the Edge, because why not? We're right there. I'm not creative. No, but also all right, here's the pun. I've got it. These are short questions and should elicit mostly short responses, and I'll be on the edge of my seat waiting for the answer. There we go.
Cool.
There we go. Did it. Got it. Snug it in.
Nice.
Okay. Quick questions. Feel free to pass on any of these. I have 9 today. Okay.
Ooh.
Here we go. Question number 1. What is your favorite open source project?
Prettier. 100%.
Oh, yes. Great.
Do you want me to expand on that, or are we doing like really quick answers?
Oh, here, I'll ask one follow-up question,
Okay.
and that is,
Okay.
do you use the default configuration, or do you override it?
I think we override a couple of things. I'm not sure, to be honest. Like, we have the shared prettier configuration that we use in our projects. I honestly don't know what that config is changing off the top of my head, but that is the great thing about prettier, in my opinion, is that and that's why I had to choose it, because it was the project that completely changed the way I work, because you don't have to think about how you write the thing. It just does
Yes.
it for you.
Yes.
And it removes that from conversations on PR reviews, because that is not what you should be spending your mental energy on. You should be spending it on kind of building things, and let the machines do the grunt work of like moving spaces around and curly braces around. I don't want to worry about that. So that's why I had to choose prettier.
Yes. I love it, and I love it for those same reasons. I asked my follow-up question because one of the things I find really funny is that some of the time we had spent doing that, we now spend arguing over what the configuration should be,
Yeah.
which is great.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Number 2. What is something that most people don't know about Portugal?
Huh. Great question. Um, I'm on the spot right now. It's not as sunny as some people advertise it. It rains quite a bit. Um,
And
I'm
just
not.
in your
I'm
area,
not
or like throughout the entire country?
in my area. I think in the south, it is really sunny. In my area, we get a fair bit of rain in the winter. And I realize that I'm not doing a good job of selling Portugal. So if you're listening, you should come to Portugal. It has great food. It's a good country. But yeah, that's the one thing I could think of.
Okay, I'll take it. I'll take it. All right, number 3. Okay, yeah, random bit of advice here. So if I'm a new JavaScript developer, um, What's one piece of advice you would give me to make the most out of Twitter?
Hmm. Uh, Try to follow diversity. Like I think there's a bit of a trap in finding people, like following people on Twitter that have a huge number of followers and that have like a great presence online, but you want to make sure that you're not following people that all look the same, if that makes sense. Like try to to learn from different people. And I think um one of the values that we have in Netlify is that diversity equals intelligence, and I really believe in that. So try to follow different people, and you will learn a lot from that, and kind of getting those different perspectives about how to approach things in tech and beyond will kind of make you a better developer, in my opinion.
I love that answer so much. The thought that it brings to mind is, um, or like the visualization that it brings to mind is, I should see competing opinions on my timeline, because then
Yeah,
I've got to look in. I have to learn what both of these people are saying, and then make the conclusion for myself.
absolutely. Yeah.
I love that. Okay, number 4. What what tech talk, meetup talk, conference talk, what talk had the most had so far has had the most impact on your career?
So this is going to be a bit of a boring answer because I already talked to you about it. But if I look back, I have to choose that one talk in that like Jekyll Conf very early on, because it it just opened up a whole universe of things that I hadn't considered. Like I was just not thinking in that direction, and watching that talk really made me, yeah, it kind of it created a world of possibilities for me, and I'm really glad that I did that. And so yeah, I'm gonna have to choose that one.
Okay, that's great. Yeah. My number 5 is I don't know how this happened, but it ties into one of your earlier answers. And so what I wrote was, not including sandwiches, what is the best food you can get in Portugal? And it ties in because you said Portugal
Oh,
has great food. So now I feel like this is a heated question.
yeah. So I would have to choose what will probably be a really boring thing for, like, it's not a super exciting thing, but it's just fresh fish, like grilled fish or seafood, or like sorry, shellfish with no sauces. It's just plain in some boring potatoes and some boring vegetables. But just eating that in a restaurant by the ocean, like I think that's what food in Portugal is about. It's not exciting, it's not like extravagant, but it's really tasty. It's really good. That would be my
And
recommendation.
really fresh, probably.
Yeah, yeah.
Is there like is Portugal, or maybe even just your area, is it known for particular types of fish, or shellfish?
Yeah, so this area, there's a type of um of shellfish that looks really strange. I think the name is barnacle. I'll
Okay.
need to look that up. I think it's called barnacle. And it looks really scary. Like it looks awful. You look at it, like, do you eat this? It looks like a claw of an animal. Um, but it's super tasty. It's like you're eating a piece of ocean. And so, yeah, that would be, if you have to have one thing in this area where I live, that would have to be that.
Wow. Okay. Yep. And I just looked up an image of it, and it doesn't look like something that you would want to eat. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It looks awful, but trust me, it's good.
That's great. Okay. Um, Okay, so I felt like since the here's my super controversial question, more than the food, and I felt like because we made the theme Jamstack, we had to touch on it. So somebody asks you, since it's been a hot topic over the last 18 months or so, what is Jamstack? How do you answer that today?
That is really interesting. That's an interesting question. I think I think it's an evolving term, and I think so. First of all, when it compares to other acronyms or similar acronyms that we had, like there was, sorry, someone's ringing the door.
Okay.
So there was like the mean stack, and every like each one of those letters meant something. So you're like prescribing a set of technologies. The Jamstack is not about that. I think it's a principle of kind of how you approach building an application for the web, and we're constantly learning how to evolve that. We started from a place that was predominantly kind of static, and we're now finding ways to extend that. We introduced, we started using things like serverless functions, and now kind of different patterns are made possible by those primitives. And I think it's a, I think it's yeah, I think it's an evolving term, and I think it's a way of kind of structuring things and thinking about what you're optimizing for. What kind of experiences do I want to deliver? Do I want to optimize for like a real response, a fast response? What is my build time? Like, it's a difficult answer, but it's still evolving. We're still kind of learning how do we extend it further, I think.
I like that. I really like that as an answer because it, it's not it's not avoiding a definition. It's saying that the definition is actually actively evolution,
Yeah,
which is okay. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, number 7. I've done this one in the last couple shows. I didn't think it would stick around, but I've gotten really interesting answers. So I'm gonna do it again. And this is a big one. It's a 4-parter question. Okay.
Ooh.
All right. So the scenario is you get to take anybody to lunch, and it's lunch, and that they can be living or not. And so the 4 parts are: who is it? Where are you taking them? What do you order? What are you going to eat? And
Mm.
what topic do you bring up first?
Wow. Um, that's a really elaborate question.
It's
Let me.
yeah,
Um,
it has no place on this really like fast. It's not a fast question. Yeah.
yeah. Um, okay. So let me think about the who. Um, I think. Um, so I'm kind of torn between two people. I'm torn between Stephen Fry and Neil deGrasse Tyson, because there are two people that you know, I would just pay money to just sit and watch them talk about anything. Like I'm kind of fascinated by whatever they say. So, but I think I will go with Stephen Fry. And the next question was where we're gonna go, right? So
Mhm.
I think I would just I think I would just take them to just one of those really simple restaurants here in Portugal by the sea with some really
Fresh
plain
seafood.
but fresh seafood. And that's probably where it would go. And that's probably what I would order, like some really fresh seafood. And the other one was the topic, right? The
Yeah,
topic
like
of
what's the first
conversation.
question you're gonna
Yeah.
ask them?
Um, um, yeah. So Stephen Fry had this fascinating series of books about Greek mythology. So I would probably ask him something about the book, like something about, tell me more about this kind of this character or this kind of myth, because I'm really fascinated by that. So I would probably ask him a question around those lines.
Interesting. Is it one book, or do you say a series of books?
I think it has. I think it has at least two
Okay.
books about that, about Greek mythology.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's great. I
Yeah.
loved how you pieced that all together. Yes, that was great.
That was a bit of a random answer, not remotely related to the Jamstack, but it was it was honest.
I mean, it's not like it was a random question or anything. Yeah. Okay, two more, and then we'll wrap this up. So number 8, the penultimate question. What is something, well, back up. So we talked a lot today about building open source tools, building tools for developers. Do you have a thing that you wish you would have built and either you never did or you haven't, or somebody got to it first? Is there just like, is there one that got away or just hasn't gotten to yet?
Um, that's a great question. So at some point in my career, I think even before I started kind of getting into the Jamstack, I was really interested by the idea of like building API first applications, which was actually a really good segue into the Jamstack, because the Jamstack is a lot about that. And there was a time where I was really invested in building an open source headless CMS that was fully programmable and fully like customizable. And I did start building something like that, but then other kind of players in the space were building such amazing solutions that I could never compete with in any shape or form, and so I just abandoned that. And so I guess that falls into the category of things like I wish I got that first, or at least I wish I got there at a time that I could kind of build something and contribute something meaningful to the ecosystem. And then whenever I see someone building like this amazing project, I get jealous and I'm like, I hate you.
Yeah.
You built something
Yes.
amazing. I wish I had done that. That happens every day. Yeah,
Yeah. Every day, right?
every
It's
day.
like
Yeah,
you can, every day you can discover, and you're like, I would have liked to. I wish I would have built that. That'd be
yeah,
great. And then
yeah,
the reality is, like, but if I would have built one or even two of these things, the maintenance and the yeah, I mean, it's a whole thing. It's all I have to continue to tell myself, actually, for a lot of these things, it's better to use them than worry
yeah,
about building
yeah,
them, which is
yeah,
okay. It's okay.
yeah, definitely.
I have that too. Okay, last question. My favorite, my second, well, it's got to be second favorite question, because the sandwich question, right? So yes, number 9. What is the worst mistake that you've made as a developer?
Hmm. Um, so I have like I don't have any of those like epic stories of like
And delete a month's worth of
wiping,
data?
yeah,
Yeah.
wiping like the production database or something. And, like I don't have any like epic stories like that to share. But um, I make mistakes all the time. Like I've caused, because of my mistakes, I've caused incidents that affected customers in production, and that happened multiple times, and it will happen again. Um, so I guess so. I don't have a fun answer to give you, so I will give you an answer of like, whoever's listening, it's okay to mess things up. It's important that you learn from the mistakes that you make and try to to be better. But you will make plenty of mistakes. You will mess things up. You will introduce bugs. You will think poorly about how to build a solution. That will happen a lot. And I think it, you know, we need to live with that, learn from that, and kind of move on.
I think it's such a great message, because it's like when you do something that affects production,
Hmm.
uh, you learn you learn not to do that thing again, and maybe some other related things that could also hurt production. But what you're saying, which is a message I don't give when I'm talking about this very much, that I really like, is that just because you learn those things doesn't mean you're not going to bring down production
Oh
again
yeah,
in the
yeah,
future. There's
yeah,
always something new to learn the hard way, so to
yeah,
speak.
yeah. Yeah, and I think there's a lot of things that you can do, as an organization or as a company to make the best out of those incidents. If you have a culture where you promote like a learning exercise where everyone gets together and discusses what happened, not to put blame on anyone, not to say, you've done this, you've caused this because you've done this, this, and that. No, it's about like getting together as a group, figuring out what happened, what could we've done differently, like what can we do
Mhm.
now to prevent this from happening in the future. And I think you get out, you come out stronger out of that exercise, as opposed to feeling like, oh, I've messed up, someone's gonna fire me, or I'm a I'm a terrible developer. Like, that's not the goal. And I think, yeah, I think there's a lot in at the organization level that should promote that sort of mentality, I think.
Yes, yes, that's great add on there. Okay. Well, excuse me. Well, that's it for today. So, Eduardo, thank you so much for being here. This has been a ton of fun.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Last thing before we go, um, why don't you can tell listeners how to get in touch with you, and feel free to plug whatever you're working on now, or your next thing.
Yeah, so you can reach me on Twitter. The handle is Eduardo Bouças, and my site is eduardoboucas.com. Yeah, my DMs are open. Feel free to chat to me about anything. I'll enjoy geeking out about building whatever it is you're building. And what I'm working on, yeah, check out Edge Functions. It's something that I'm super excited about. I was super happy to be involved in that project. I would love to hear people's feedback on it, and I would love to make it better because of your feedback. So yeah, give it a try and tell me how it goes.
Fantastic. All right. And for everybody in the audience, thank you for being here. We will be back live again on June 2nd with our guest, Kelly Moore. So, from all of us at CFE.dev, thank you for joining us for this show, and we'll see you next time.